Hi, welcome to your Algebra Gateway Test Solutions video. So we're going to take a look at some common algebra skills that you need to have for AB Calc. Here in number one, we have factor and simplify. So what you have to remember is that you're looking for the greatest common factor, which would be any factors that are repeated in the terms raised to the smallest power. So in this one, we have this x minus 1 factor in both terms, and it is raised, the smallest power would be negative 1/2. You always pull the negative out. So taking a look at this, we're going to pull out x minus 1 to the negative 1/2. And then we're going to look at what's left. Obviously, if I take it away from the first term, I'm just going to have an x left. Plus, and then over here, remember that when you are dividing out, pulling out or factoring out a factor, what you're doing is actually dividing. And when you divide, you subtract exponents. So when I'm pulling it out of this one, I'm really taking this exponent and subtracting negative 1/2 from it. So 1/2 minus negative 1/2 is 1. So it ends up being 2 times x minus 1 to the first power. And then that, after simplifying what's in the parentheses, that's kind of always your last step, you would end up with, collect your like terms, x plus 2x, 3x, and then minus 2. And so that gives us a nice factored form. And then if sometimes we like negative exponents after we have factored, we may address the negative exponent and move it to the bottom. And we also address sometimes if it's a rational number there for the exponent, we might say, what does that actually mean? So that would be the simplified form of that one. All right, looking at the next problem, number 2, working with fractions. We're going to utilize this technique multiplying by a form of 1. So what we do is we look at each of these many denominators, which would be here, here, and this doesn't have a denominator. You can think of it as being over 1. And you say, what is the least common denominator of these 3 many denominators? And it's going to be the y times y minus k. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply by a form of 1 in order to simplify. Yes, we could get a common denominator, combine, and then do the division, but this is typically a much faster way to do this. So we want to make sure that whatever is here is a form of 1. Right? So we go to our actual multiplication, and when we multiply, we're going to remember to distribute to each term. And the point of using the LCD is that it will cancel out the denominator in the numerator of this complex fraction. So this times this, the y minus k's would cancel, and you'd be left with 1 times y minus, that's from right here, and then this times the second fraction, the y's would cancel, and you'd be left with parentheses y minus k. Be careful about parentheses because it is going to matter that you distribute there. And then you have your y minus k. And see, in one step, we have eliminated the complex fraction and gone to a regular fraction where we can now simplify the top. We can collect like terms. Y minus y would go away, and then minus negative k becomes k over k times y, y minus k. You leave denominators factored because the objective is to simplify and to remove or eliminate factors from the top and the bottom. So the bottom, don't multiply it out because it's already in factored form. That is kind of your main objective. And then here we can cancel the k out. So this would go away, and then we end up with our final answer, which is going to be 1 over y minus k. Right? Here in our second problem right here, we have x to the 1/2 plus 2 over the square root of 3. When you are squaring, please remember that you are FOILing, that you do have a middle term, that you have your first, outer, inner, last. So make sure not only are you distributing and taking your first, and you add your exponents. So 1/2 plus 1/2 would give you an x. And then you multiply the last two, okay? I like to do first and last, and then I'll do the middle term. You would have this times this, which is going to give me 4/3. That's your first squared, your last squared, and then don't forget your middle term. You're going to have 2 over square root of 3 of these x to the 1/2 and another 2 over square root of 3. If you add those two together for your middle terms, you would end up with 4 over square root of 3x to the 1/2. And so that would be the distribution of that. Just remember that you have a middle term. All right, solving for x over here, this is quadratic. So any quadratic, please make sure that you get 0 on one side, minus 5 equal to 0. If this factored, then you'd factor it. If it doesn't factor, certainly quadratic formula is a quick way. The opposite of b would be positive 1 plus or minus square root of your b squared minus 4a and c all over 2a. And then just simplify. So 1 plus or minus the square root of 21 over 2, and then we're done with that problem. Pretty easy. Just remember that you have to isolate and get 0 on one side. Finding the smallest value of x that satisfies the equation. If you're solving absolute value, remember you always get two equations. X plus 5 equals plus or minus 3. So your x equals negative 5 plus or minus 3. So you have two answers, negative 8 or negative 5 plus 3, negative 2. That there will always be the two answers for that. Your general form of your equation of a line passing through this. Notice it says general form. I do always start with point slope when you have a point and a slope. So I'm going to start with y equals, I do the Taylor form where instead of y minus, you have it on the other side. You have your slope, which is 5/2 x minus 3 minus your 1. And then if I want it in the general form, which is your ax plus by equals c, then any fractions I get rid of. So this would be 2y equals, and I'm going to distribute while I'm here. I got rid of the 2, so 5x minus 15 minus 1. And then move the 5x over to this side. It doesn't really matter which way you go. I'm going to move this, I'm going to go this way and make it 5x minus 2y equals 16. And then that would be my general form. Solving for y prime, just a common little strategy. Make sure you know that you have y prime on both sides. So you're going to need to get the y primes together. So I'm going to move them. I'm going to have x, y prime minus y prime. Move the y over to this side, 1 minus y. And then from there, you're going to factor out this y prime. I did not plan ahead for my work, so we'll come over here. So we would have y prime times x minus 1, 1 minus y, and then we would divide. So we would have 1 minus y over x minus 1. Now, you do realize in fraction sense, a lot of you get confused with the negatives, that this is exactly the same as the opposite of y minus 1 over x minus 1, which is exactly the same as the opposite of, or we could actually take that negative and put it on the bottom. So we could do as an equivalent answer, y minus 1 over 1 minus x. They're all the same answer and they'd be all acceptable. All right, taking a look at number 8 here. Find the equation of the circle and give the center and radius. If I am completing the square, I group the x terms together, plus 4x, group the y terms, plus 2y squared minus 12y, and I like to take the number to the other side. Factor out your lead coefficient, 2x squared plus 2x. Put your parentheses, you're going to complete the square here. Factor out your 2 here, y squared minus 6y plus blank. Now that we've seen these, I'm going to go ahead and erase them so that I have more room. Okay, so we have this equals my negative 11 plus blank. Then we complete the square, so you take half and square it, and then recognize that you're actually adding 2 to that side, and then take half and then square it, and what you're actually adding is 18 to that side. Then you factor 2x plus 1 squared plus 2 y minus 3 squared equals, add all this up, which is going to give me 7 plus 2, 9, divide by 2, so x plus 1 squared plus y minus 3 squared equals 9 halves. So your center is going to be -1, 3, and your radius is going to be the square root of 9 halves. And in calculus, this is perfectly fine. So is 3 over square root of 2. So is 3 square root of 2 over 2. You don't necessarily have to simplify. They're all correct. All right, number 9. When we take a look at that one, my time, make sure I'm under my 15 minutes. Solve for x. So probably the first thing that you would look at here is I would, because I have a fraction and then this, I would probably move this over to this side and I would also cross multiply. So I would probably do 1 over x equals -2 over my x minus 5. Remember, a -1 just puts it in the denominator. And then when I get to there, I can cross multiply. X minus 5 equals -2x. Collect like terms. 3x equals 5. X equals 5/3. I would probably check and make sure this is not a restriction. The restrictions are 0 and 5, which is not one of them, so that would be your solution. So fairly straightforward. Finding domain, again, radical even roots. 2x plus 3 has to be greater than or equal to 0. So x is greater than or equal to -3 halves, -3 halves to infinity. So that's your quick solution guide to your Algebra Gateway test.